everyone loved doing the job because everyone loved selling the product because the consumer loved it so much. It was a real positive. And that was one of the things when you thought to yourself, actually, there's really something here. We can probably build a business out of this. And then it was going back to try and navigate, well, how do we start a business from this? Yes, we're doing the markets. Yes, we got a great, consumer following. People love the product. But now we have to take it to retail.
Paul, very warm welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Brent.
Had the pleasure of your acquaintance since 2019, pretty early on.
Yeah, early 2019, sort of pre-pandemic.
Yeah, the good days. One of our favourite clients. Nothing to do with the gorgeous deliveries of beautiful boxes of tomatoes that we get when working on your projects. I mean, literally, if you could see people when they arrive in the office and you get people messaging saying, save me some. I didn't get any last time.
That's brilliant.
And I would say if anyone has never seen, because there's not that many of the stores that you distribute into that you actually get the full crates like you do at Bailey and Sage and so on. And when you see them, I mean, they are just sort of picture perfect ready, aren't they? Just the gorgeous colours and everything. Really heroes the product. So yeah, really looking forward to going through your business, the products that you do, your stories, etc. Such a wonderful brand. The first thing that I'll do is just a bit of an introduction for people who aren't familiar with the brand. So you're the co-founder and managing director. You started in 2007.
Yeah, early 2007.
Yeah. You have 9 hectares of growing space. And that produces somewhere around 3 million kilos of tomatoes in the Isle of Wight.
Give or take, depending on the year and depending on what type of varieties we grow. Yeah, around about that.
And so you've got over 500 customers, largest ones, Waitrose, Ocado, Amazon Fresh, Whole Foods, etc. And you've won so many awards from Great Taste, Great British Food Sort Association, Good Housekeeping, as you said previously. So my first question is going to be, what's so special about the Isle of Wight for growing tomatoes?
Predominantly the light. We got some of the strongest light in the UK, given the geography of where we are, in the south of England. Also on a small island surrounded by water, so you get almost like a natural reflection to that light. Light is the main food source for growing tomatoes. The more light you've got, the more photosynthesis, or the better the photosynthesis, therefore the better the sugar you can develop in the fruit. And that's kind of why tomatoes have been grown on the Isle of Wight probably since about the late 1960s. It's all to do with the climate. When the cloud comes in from the Atlantic, it kind of hits the needles and it disperses out. The needles acts almost like a cutter, and it cuts the cloud, and the cloud heads north and south, and then almost like so on the Isle of Wight, it almost helps that light transmission that bit better as well. And we're right in the valley, right in the middle of the Isle of Wight, so we get the benefit of the maritime climate, but we're sort of protected from the wind at the same time. So we get really, really good light, but we don't get the extremes in temperature because we got, when it gets too hot, we've got that kind of cool maritime breeze coming in. So yeah, it's kind of like the perfect place really in the UK to sort of grow tomatoes.
And so what's the story with the business? Because you were chefing in Australia and then you came back to the UK and you started the company, and just tell us a bit about why you started it and how you've got to where you are today.
Yeah, I suppose like most things, it came about by chance, and discovered these tomatoes on the Isle of Wight. I've been travelling in Australia and sort of working. I'd sort of grown up on the Isle of Wight, in a very tourist destination. So from a young age, if you wanted to go and get, earn some money, you went and got a job, and predominantly those jobs are kind of in kitchens, and that led to kind of an interest in food at quite an early age. And I kind of used that, I went to university, did a kind of more of a media degree, but then sort of came out of that and went back into food, and sort of came back from Australia and was at that juncture of, what am I going to do? What's the next move in life? And just through chance, I happened to then find myself at Borough Market selling tomatoes. Yeah. And, didn't really know what to expect, set up, and just had this queue of people. Because we had, I suppose back in those days, we had about 6 different varieties, and, you probably didn't see that many varieties really in mainstream retail at the time. Obviously there's lots more now. But back then, we had some yellow tomatoes, we had baby plum tomatoes, sort of piccolo cherry on the vine. And all these tomatoes have been grown for flavour. Grown with the right light, left on the plant to ripen, really got the best flavour out of them. So when people came to that stall at Borough, you had that aroma.
I was going to say the smell is so intoxicating.
The vines. So I remember going there back in the day, because I was at the first Borough Market, where it was only on Saturday.
Yeah.
And I remember, amongst other things, the Isle of Wight tomatoes. And at the time, it was really difficult, like you say, to get good tomatoes easily and not pay stupid amounts of money for them in delis or whatever. So it was a real it was lovely to see that, and like you say, the smell of the vines.
It takes me back to my childhood. My granddad had a greenhouse and grew tomatoes, and the smell when you go in, I mean, it's just heaven. It's one of the best smells ever for me.
Yeah, we did that, and we did it a few times, and it just got busier and busier, and people just seemed to love the tomatoes. And then it's just like, well, we just had this product was just amazing, and it was selling itself. And I suppose at the time as well, the kind of whole food scene in the UK was starting to change. People were becoming more interested in kind of where food came from, different types of food as well. I think pretty wasn't until the late 90s, was it, that people really started to look at food from abroad or from the Mediterranean or bringing that into their kind of diet.
Yeah, I was going to say Indian and Chinese. Yeah. They've been around a long time, but
so it was quite an interesting time. And I suppose the Borough Market in those days, you were surrounded by like-minded people that were all starting a business based on trying to champion a specific product or type of food. So it was kind of exciting. And so we started there, and then we branched out and we started doing more farmers markets where we were not selling the product, harvesting the product on a Friday, driving it to London, in the early hours of a Saturday morning, and then selling it to the consumer. And the consumer was just so positive, and that really is the beginning of the story.
Yeah, and so in the early days, it was that weekly grind at the farmers markets, and obviously now.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, every weekend was, we'd harvest the product, we'd pack it up. There'd be a few of us from the Isle of Wight that would sort of drive up in vans, stay overnight, and then we had lots of people in London that would come and work for us as well at the weekends. In those days, lots of actors, musicians, people, looking for sort of additional work at the weekend. But everyone loved doing the job because everyone loved the, selling the product because the consumer loved it so much. It was a real positive. And that was one of the things when you thought to yourself, actually, there's really something here. We can probably build a business out of this. And then it was going back to try and navigate, well, how do we start a business from this? Yes, we're doing the markets. Yes, we got a great, consumer following. People love the product. But now we have to take it to retail. And that was a lot harder. But, we really had to champion flavour, quality, taste, innovation, local freshness, and just keep pushing that message. And it was... I think in the early days it was hard. People were very much price driven. You talk to a farm shop or a deli, and tell people the story, and people I think were a little bit nervous because where we were and where we were pitched in terms of price versus what they could go and buy out of, say, a traditional wholesale market. If they're trading something out of Morocco or Spain or Israel at the time. But then we got people to take the product, and then the consumer came in and brought the product, and then came back and re-brought it. Yeah, and then that's when it started, and then. At the same time, we started to PR a bit about, who we were, what we were doing, why we were a little bit different, and then kind of word just sort of spread. And so we started to go to lots of different, farm shops, delis, specialist food retailers kind of all across the south of England, down to the West Country, sort of central London, and then started working really with chefs. Really starting to get elevate tomatoes onto menus and get people talking about Isle of Wight tomatoes, but looking at variation and variety and flavour and texture.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there that I find really interesting. Is the way that you had to almost start the premiumisation of tomatoes, because it wasn't there in the UK. So, going to people and saying, well, people will pay more than standard for what was always called a salad tomato or something like that. Going in and make it, it might have been, I don't know if it was 2 times the price or whatever, but you had to do that job because no one had done it for you already. And then the other thing that you mentioned was around also selling to restaurants, because, as you know, we both like to go to restaurants, but seeing not just tomatoes on there, but you being called out as Isle of Wight tomatoes on menus. Yeah. So I think so. The fact that you sold at markets, you're in all these other sort of bigger stores, bigger distribution, the Ocados, the Waitroses of the world, but also on sort of high-end menus. So it's crossing so many different points, really, of consumption.
Yeah, getting onto menus was a big thing for us, because what we do is a bit different, is we've always really championed innovation. So yes, we grow a large area of tomatoes on the Isle of Wight, but every year we put a certain amount of area aside to grow new varieties. I think this year, for example, we got probably about 150 different varieties in trial. Wow. Some of those could be just a few plants. Some of them is a little bit more than that, but we're talking with seed companies and breeders, across the world, and we're constantly trying to find the next best thing. in terms of flavour, or something that delivers something slightly different in terms of, like, be a different type of flavour. It might not just be that traditional, sweet acidity. It might have a more fruity note to it, or more umami. But we grow these varieties, and we have a taste panel then score them each week for us throughout the summer season. And then, that was why it was, by doing that and then working with chefs, it was taking the product direct to someone who was going to do something with it, inspire us, should we be growing more of it? And then to see it onto menus was great, because then it gave confidence to consumers that, maybe they should go and try this. Going back to, really the early days at Borough Market, when you stood there and tried to sell someone a yellow tomato, people just look at you and go, well, what's that? Yeah.
What's wrong with this tomato?
Yeah. And then so you had to almost build a confidence in people, to try the product, and take it away. And I think, now people phone us up looking for specific varieties, or they want these colours, or they want the difference. But back then it was very, very different. It was like tomatoes were red. Yeah. They were either round, like you said, Micah, or they were cherry, or they were baby plum, or maybe even beef. But now there's so much variation. And what we've tried to do in the last sort of 15 years is really champion that innovation and variation. And, because tomatoes, I think over time have become more part of people's diet. People do a lot more with tomatoes than they did a long time ago. Years ago it was just people would have a tomato and it would go on the side of your plate as a salad, or maybe you'd buy some of the small cherry ones and eat them on their own because they're quite sweet. But now you can just cook a whole range of different cuisines with different types of tomato, and by using all those different varieties, it brings something different to the dish. And that's why it was really key in those days, really working with people that really wanted to do something different and champion what we were trying to do.
And I think the thing, although obviously we've mentioned taste, and taste is all important, we always bang on about taste. The colour with tomatoes is really important, and the different shapes. And so all the everything from different colours of red, some are streaked with green, some are green, some are yellow, different shapes. And we all eat with our eyes to a certain degree. And just to see that variety on a plate, and just a tomato salad, maybe with a little bit of shallot or onion on it and basil, just lovely to see that.
If even. I mean, I moved to Turkey when I was 8 years old, and so I was spoiled for a few years of just having amazing tomatoes, because their tomatoes there when they're in season, incredible, sort of on a par with what you're doing. And just one of the favourite starters at a restaurant is just a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of salt, maybe some beyaz peynir, which is their version of feta. And they've always been one of my favourite ingredients. And I think there's something that's quite unique about them, because we always talk about the 5 tastes, and tomatoes have got 4 of them. You got sweetness, you got sourness, which is perfectly balanced, which is really important for something to be moreish. There's a little bit of bitterness there. You don't really notice it, but there is bitterness there to just kind of balance again. But the really important one is the umami that you don't get. And so that's why, pinch of salt, you've ticked off all of the 5 tastes before you even get to flavour. And then you've got this lovely aromatic, almost floral sort of flavour that varies from variety, etc. So it is almost the perfect salad item, fruit, vegetable. Won't get into that argument.
Yeah. And
What do you say when people say to you, is it a fruit, is it a veg, is it a salad item? What do you say?
I think we always call it a fruit.
Okay.
But that's kind of internally kind of what we refer to it as. But I think it's very different. What people don't look at it so much as a fruit. But you're right. That kind of variation of color and flavor has kind of really inspired people, I think, over the years to do more and try tomatoes in a different way. It's that simplistic approach that is often the best.
Yeah.
You don't need to do a lot. It's just the product speaks for itself.
I'd also say it's also one of those ingredients or food items where the gulf between a good one and a bad one is probably as wide as it can possibly be. I mean, you get a poor tomato and I'm sorry, I just won't eat it. Whereas the best ones, you build your meal around it, you go out of your way, you pay considerably more for it. And you see that in lots of ingredients and foods, but I'd say tomatoes is one of those where it's...
Because there's so many poor ones.
Yeah.
The other things, olives I always find.
True. Okay, so obviously getting into retail has been a huge part, the larger retailers has been a huge part of the journey in recent years. And it must be challenging being a brand in fresh produce because there's not that many. And it must have challenges that, say, if you're going into sort of snacks or ambient categories, managing the wastage. Just how do you operate as a brand in sort of a category or a distribution channel in the major retailers that is usually not branded? What have the main challenges been?
I think from very early on in the business, we understood that we needed to do something different. Yeah, we needed to elevate tomato beyond being just a commodity. Yeah, because that's how we were being treated when we were having conversations with people. People very much commoditized tomatoes and put them all into one category. So we needed to elevate tomatoes out of that category, and the way to do that was through brand.
Yeah.
We were fortunate that the Isle of Wight is quite unique, and it gave us a good talking point to talk about how it was different, and why specifically tomatoes grew well on the Isle of Wight. So that was a starting point in terms of how we would brand the business. But also, for multiple types of reasons, brand was important to help get our story out, to spread the word. We were quite a small business based on the Isle of Wight. How do we get people to know us? How do we, there are lots of big, Dutch growers, Spanish growers, all these sort of cooperatives that are having these conversations at a high level with retailers. And, we were just this kind of small business that had operated on a few markets, it's farmers markets within London. How do we get consumers to know more about us? And so brand was key. We were very fortunate, that in the early days that we had quite a good story to tell, and quite a lot of journalists shopped at the markets with us every weekend.
Course, yeah.
So when we started to think about trying to do some PR to try and promote the brand, it was quite natural. People already knew the product, so we got some good stories off of it. And then along came social media, and then social media made it a lot easier to start telling your story, connecting direct with consumers. Yeah, and that's what we've always tried to do: really connect direct with consumers, or even some of the retailers that we work with. It's always been about trying to build relationships. Relationships are key, and I think that's with the brand as well. Is trying to have that relationship with the consumer about what we do, build that trust, build that honesty,
and I think also partnerships as well. You do quite a lot of partnerships with whether it's chefs or other brands or whatever. That's obviously been a real strength.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think tomatoes are really versatile, aren't they? So they lend themselves to doing partnerships and working with other like-minded businesses or products. But yeah, brand was key really to sort of to try and open the doors really for us to do other things, but also have some protection around what we did as well. Made what we did quite unique, and I think that's also very, very key as well. And so
with what I'm sort of interested in is you got perishable product. I don't know how many days life it has once it's picked, but you've got to obviously get that to whichever direct to consumers easier, because it's one thing, but once you're distributing to supermarkets and so forth, that cuts it down. So how do you make sure that it's a sort of a question around sort of distribution, but also around wastage, but also providing enough, because you've got a product that you don't want to have any waste at source. You don't want to be throwing stuff away, but you want to be providing enough to all your customers, not short them. And with a perishable product, that is much more difficult than an ambient product. So how have you handled that?
I think we got much better at it over the years. It's still not an exact science, with tomatoes, when the plants are young, when the light's at its strongest, really at the early part of the season, you get an increase in production. But what you need to do when you're cropping for the year is know what you're going to need come sort of July, August, September to have the volume as well. Yeah. So quite often you plant and you have a bigger production in the earlier part of the season, so you need to learn how to manage that. Obviously, tomatoes are very influenced by weather, but it's normally, when we have the good weather, that's when you get the good set in the plant. But you don't really see the benefit of that in terms of yield for about 6 or 7 weeks afterwards. Most of the time when that happens, in 6 or 7 weeks' time, it's pouring with rain, a bit like it was this summer. And you also have got high production around you. So we've always had to look at other ways in which we can utilise tomatoes. So there's some of it about utilising that class 1 production that comes off that, but also growing any product. People talk about wonky veg now. Yeah. But, we don't have wonky in so much tomatoes, but we have, things where leaf has covered the tomato when it's ripening. So, you've got blotchiness on the fruit. Nothing wrong with it, but, it doesn't look quite how it should. It's not how someone wants to see it on a shelf. Maybe we don't get the watering quite right, and so we get some split in the tomato, or we don't quite harvest it at the right time. It's a lot harder with like a vine tomato. When a tomato flower sets, the bee comes along, does the pollination, and it pollinates the flowers at the top of the vine first, and then works its way down, and then that carries itself through to ripening. So when the fruit actually gets to ripening, because the bee pollinated those flowers first, that fruit gets to maturity first. So that starts ripening quicker. So then you have a balance in the vines, and the top fruit are ripening quicker than the bottom fruit. And so often you have to look at it and take it. It's very much a judgment call. Do I have to take one of those top fruit off because it's going to get too ripe to make sure I get the bottom fruit ripe, or do I take off the green fruit on the bottom to save the top fruit? But either way, you're producing an excess product. And so we were very, very keen years ago to try and find a way to utilise kind of all of the tomatoes that we produced, whether it be the really, really good stuff or whether it be the stuff where we've got the water wrong, it splits, and, because the flavour's there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's food, isn't it? And I think we're all very conscious that we don't really want any food waste.
Yeah.
And as long as you've got something you can do something with, then you can go and make a really, really good product from it,
Absolutely.
but just in a different way.
Yeah.
And that's hence why, our relationship, kicked off in sort of 2018, 2019, because we were looking at, different ways of, taking tomatoes to market, and with a very similar sort of message of what we've done in the early days with the fresh tomatoes, having something really, really super tasty, but a bit different.
And it also preserves that flavour in an ambient format. So you're capturing the sun almost in the jar or the whatever, package, whatever format you put it in, and whether it's a sauce or a ketchup or juice or
yeah,
whatever.
definitely. And that's also helped us try and balance seasonality over the years as well. When we get to sort of December, January, February, when we're out of production, it's maintaining a sale, and
Exactly.
you've got something, like you say, you can preserve in the summer, when tomatoes are at their peak, process it into an ambient product,
and keep it in consumers' minds as well, because you want them to sort of be thinking about tomatoes not just in the sort of summertime when they're having lots of salads and stuff. They'll buy other tomato products throughout the year, so why not be part of that as well?
And it is an ingredient that lends itself so well to being put into a jar and sort of ambient stable, because it's got the acidity in it naturally.
Yeah.
And also the flavour, it changes when it's sort of hot filled or pasteurised, but not for the worse.
No,
it's a
just
different flavour, and so you use it in a different way.
Yeah, but we were very conscious when we started to process tomatoes that we wanted to do it the right way. That we didn't want to have to add a lot of acidifiers and other kind of products in there to add life. We just wanted to control shelf life through pH, acidity, heat, and just hygiene. Yeah, and
Smoke as well.
And smoke. And so we worked with Camden BRI to really define a process. So when we did process the tomatoes and preserve them, when people then opened it, 2 months later, 3 months later, it was fresh. Yeah. And that's what really jumped out, is that kind of fresh tomato taste and aroma.
And can we talk a little bit about all of these additional products that you've developed and launched in recent years, and also some of the other crops that you grow as well? Just give a sort of a sense of the full range of the portfolio outside of just fresh tomatoes.
Yeah, well, tomatoes is kind of the main thing that we do. But in the last few years, we've tried to experiment with a few other products. So we've tried to look at aubergine. Aubergine's a product that, 10, 15 years ago didn't get much of a look in the UK. I think people were scared of aubergines. I think especially back in the days when you had to sort of salt them to sort of get the bitterness out of them.
Supposedly.
Yeah. It was an old wives' tale.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think there was a barrier to entry to people actually buying an aubergine. But I think in more recent years, especially with people more focused on sort of plant-based eating, aubergines had a bit of a resurgence.
Yeah.
But really, when you go into most retailers, it's just a standard aubergine. That's what you see. But if you go to Turkey or Italy or Spain, you see a different array of aubergines available. So what we wanted to try and do was start to grow some different types of aubergines. Following that same format in which we've done with tomato, taking that standard tomato and then looking at kind of what else was available, what else could we try and grow? Because they do have different textures, different flavours. Some are a little bit sweeter than others, And so we've tried to experiment with that, and it's been quite successful in the last couple of years. And I think next year we're looking at growing another type, another variety into the mix. We've looked at some peppers, but more looking at things like Padron peppers and things that are a little bit different rather than sort of your classic California bell type pepper. Next year, we're going to look at doing a few chilies as well. But, really, it's about trying to grow sort of more complementary product to kind of what we're already doing.
And value added as well.
Value added, just creating that basket
Yeah.
that really then focuses on those same things, quality, flavour, innovation.
We've seen quite a lot of those Padron peppers, haven't we?
Yeah.
In those big boxes.
Well, I was just about to ask, did you ever see a spicy one? Do you ever get a spicy one in the ones that you grow?
Yeah.
You do?
Well,
It's so rare nowadays to find.
Yeah.
That used to be the whole thing for anyone who's not familiar with Padron peppers. Is it used to be like 1 in 10 or 1 in 12
yeah.
would
So-
be
so-
really spicy and the rest don't have spice. So it's a bit of a Russian roulette type of thing. But now,
Rare,
most of
isn't
them
it?
that you see in the retailers, that you just don't get the spicy ones.
Yeah, so originally we grew a variety that was very traditional, and it had that. It had that, that naturally hot capsicum kind of like
Yeah.
what 1 in 10
Yeah.
sort of Padron, and that was quite challenging. in the early days of people not
Why
really
is it-
understanding
Oh, is that
pack.
because they didn't understand it?
Yeah, especially, you know, if you're going to food service and to chefs, people understood it, yeah?
Yeah.
If you're going to more consumer, people didn't understand it.
That's the beauty
And it
of
would
the
always be
Padron
that-
pepper, I always think.
Yeah, but it'd
As long
always
as
be,
you're expecting it.
but it would always be like Granny that would get the really hot one, and then we get a phone call from, you know, from someone. So then we looked at doing different things and growing different varieties, and so like, a bit like aubergines, where the kind of the bitterness has been bred out with kind of Padron peppers.
Yeah.
That kind of spicy kind of capsicum kind of element has been bred out with lots of varieties.
Oh, nice.
So, you know, we do grow is we grow one variety now that doesn't have the heat, and we grow another variety that does, and then we mix them at the point of harvest. So we are continuing that
So
kind
you
of
still
traditional.
there's fewer of them.
Because I think people want it. Yeah, people expect it. If you've got the authenticity of a product, that's what people
That's
want.
the draw. If you're going to serve them at
I think,
tapas, that's what.
but
that
all
fun
I can
element.
say is next time you send us some, just the traditional ones. Yeah. Don't want any of these non-spicy ones.
But isn't it? It's about education, isn't it? And people, once people understand the product a bit more, understand a bit more
You're so limited
what they
how
can
much
do
you
with
can
it.
do that on pack or on a shelf space, etc.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, just to sort of finish off the rest of your portfolio of products. So you've got pasta sauces, various condiments, pestos, ketchups, but you do smoked tomatoes, you dry tomato, and you do everything in-house.
Yeah, everything is on nursery. We built a production kitchen probably about 10 years ago to try and really, to start with, we called it like a development kitchen because we wanted to sort of see kind of how we could process these products, how we could be a bit different. It's always, you know, we thought of this methodology of that you wanted to do it in small batches, you know, to give it that kind of small batch handcrafted kind of feel. But really, you know, the glass house you can see from the window from the kitchen, so that, you know, the tomatoes are coming straight, you know, in from the glass house fresh. We're processing them that day. And I suppose we wanted to look at two things really. One was, going down the kind of route of looking at sauces and things that we could cook that could be ambient. But then we wanted to look at kind of the sort of semi-dried tomato as well, because I think there's a real opening for something that tastes a bit better than what's currently available in the marketplace. When we started to do that, it was a bit more challenging because, you know, if you wanted to cook tomatoes into sauces, there was machinery, you know, you could go and buy, you know, off the shelf. To dry tomatoes, you know, 10 years ago, you know, there wasn't a tomato drying machine you could go and buy. So we had to get people to build a few like bespoke pieces of equipment for us. Because what we were trying to do is just, you know, mimic that kind of Mediterranean climate and just have that sort of warm, sort of circulating air that was kind of taking the water off the tomato. And
But not all of it, not too much.
Not all of it, no. We didn't want to go down to sun-dried level. We wanted that kind of like, you know, that in between.
Sun-blushed.
So well, people, that people will know it's sun-blushed. Yeah. You know, there's still a bit of bite to it, but there's still some, you know, some moisture and, you know.
It is the sweet spot, literally.
It's a sweet spot, yeah. So we experimented with doing that. But again, wanted to do it in a very natural way and didn't want to have to acidify it once we'd finished production. So, you know, we worked with Camden for quite a few years really to really hone that process down. But at the same time we were doing that, we started to experiment with like almost smoking the tomato as well to give it a bit of a smokiness. But it was once you smoke the tomato and then once you put it into the oil, it's when it went into the oil the kind of magic happened, because then the oil sort of took on this kind of like smokiness,
And tomatoiness as well.
Tomatoiness, yeah, and that's been one of our biggest products over the years, and especially more now as well, because, you know, people can take that kind of an umaminess from that sort of dried tomato and that smokiness, and if you're looking at that whole kind of plant-based diet, it adds another dimension of flavour in there.
Yeah.
That you
and what's often lacking, that sort of meaty umami,
definitely.
richness.
So what we've always tried to do is do things a little bit different, you know, not do what was currently on the shelf. We wanted to make sauces that were fresh, were natural, and maybe had a bit different in terms of the approach. Like, you know, we do a shakshuka, which is, you know, something that people understand and recognise a little bit more now from, you know, going out and having brunch, but you know, but it doesn't really exist kind of on the shelf, and, you know, we're trying to give people a reason to buy something that's different, but again, sort of following the same kind of, you know, methodology that we put to tomatoes about making sure you use the right quality, you know, the ingredient or the right tomato, and you cook it in the right way. Yeah.
It also brings that to another sort of occasion for eating tomatoes. So shakshuka is traditionally a breakfast or brunch type thing, whereas, you know, a lot of people will be having tomatoes as, you know, salad, which might be more lunchy, but then some of those sauces brings it into more evening occasions. So it spreads it through the day, and that's the sort of thing that I think with any product you have, you're trying to hit every eating point of the day. Or
and you obviously do the juices as well.
Juices as well.
So fits with drinking.
But that's the versatility of the tomato, isn't it? You kind of eat it kind of at every stage throughout the day, and that's like
it doesn't get tired or boring because it's so versatile.
I think it comes back to that complexity of tastes that's going on that makes it almost a bit like chocolate. It just goes with so many things because it has that complexity. Talking about all of these products that you've focused on so much in recent years, a big driving force of that was the pandemic, because that was brutal for you as a business in terms of what it meant for your sort of fresh hospitality business, because that just obviously got shut down. And so you really had to pivot in 2020 and 2021. I think you were planning on doing some of these things anyway, but am I right in saying that COVID pretty
we'd always wanted to develop a direct-to-consumer website, an online shop, but hadn't done it, and hadn't really got around how we were going to navigate some of the challenges of sending fresh tomatoes via a courier to someone's house. But yeah, when the pandemic came along, a vast proportion of our business was still very much food service led, and we'd sown all the seed and grown the crop. We'd sown the seed in probably late December, and we were on the verge of kind of harvesting in sort of early April. But we'd grown all these interesting kind of big beef heirloom heritage type tomatoes, and so we needed to find we needed to do something different with them. So it was, I suppose, going back to the point about tomatoes, all the different colours and people buy their eye. So we came up with this kind of mixed box of this 3 kilo mixed box of tomatoes, which was like just had all these different colours and shapes and sizes in. And we put it onto our social media, onto our Instagram. And then lots of the kind of food photographers kind of picked up on it. And then word started to spread. And this is kind of the power of brand, isn't it? We had a really kind of active following on social media anyway. And then they kind of picked it up and started ordering, and then it kind of spread out from there. So what the pandemic did for us is it helped us to find a completely new market or new audience for the tomatoes, people that hadn't heard of us before, or who did, were based in different areas of the country or hadn't come across us, and it's been, it's been great because we've now connected with a completely new consumer, and we've kept that going ever since the kind of pandemic. And then, other things we're looking at, how do we diversify more into kind of products? Because, people talk about sustainability, and it's something that's really, really, close to what we try to do in it, in every day in terms of how we grow and what we do. But to me, sustainability is going back to that whole thing of making sure that if you're going to grow a product, you need to utilize all of it. Yeah, not just the good stuff that goes onto the shelf, but making sure you've got a home and a use for all of it. And I think during that period, it gave us the ability to be able to focus into the areas and look at channeling different products and looking at different markets. And it's still a work in progress today, but that's kind of, that's where we want to see the sort of future of the business going. And so if we expand, the size of the business or the size of the growing area, we're expanding on the knowledge that, we're going to be able to produce, with everything that we grow. Yeah. And the same as when we diversify into aubergines and peppers and stuff like that. There's always going to be wonky stuff or stuff that, isn't quite good enough for the pack, but it's making sure that then we've got a home for that as well. And we can turn that into something really, really, really good.
I think about one of the very few things good about the pandemic was that so many suppliers of fruits, vegetables, meat, fish had to start an online presence and direct to consumer. And I, for one, have used that ever since a lot more, because a lot of them weren't doing it, so it was quite hard to do it. But some suppliers to mainly restaurants now do it direct to consumer, which I still use, and that, I think that's been a really good thing that's come into it. It
kind of removed a barrier. That now the consumers can connect direct with you as the producer.
But the consumer is also so much more open to it because people don't have anything else to do than, I'll start making sourdough for the first time in my life. But also exploring cooking more and working with ingredients that maybe they hadn't. So there's definitely some benefits that came out of it.
That's a really good point there. You mentioned about sourdough. But I think, as consumers as a whole now, I think people are a lot more interested in whatever type of food it is they're looking at. They want to know more about it. Yeah. And I think bread's a really, really good example of that.
Have you ever made sourdough, Mike? I can't remember.
I think you well know that I started sourdough way before the general population did. When I moved to Kingston, and there were no good bakeries.
I think the question really is: have we had an episode of the podcast yet?
We haven't mentioned
your sourdough.
Well,
rightfully so.
I think we should carry
extremely
on.
good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just don't think I actually tried your sourdough.
Have you not?
I've heard a lot about it in the last few years, but
you'll
I've actually
literally
tried
have a loaf in the post next week. Now that you've said that,
that was a hint, but yeah.
If we can just go back to the brand side of things a little bit, because you recently had a big rebrand, and I'd be interested to know did you learn anything as part of that? Because obviously when you go through these rebrand projects, it forces you to kind of have a real deep dive into where do you sit, what are the consumers looking for, what do you call out? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what that project was like?
It was really interesting. Again, we kind of kicked that off probably about a similar time that we kind of started talking about products, and then we started the project. And then when the sort of pandemic came along, we sort of slowed it down just to sort of focus on other areas. And so, but we kept it kind of going the whole way through. And I think what it really showed us was that a lot of the touch points that we now talk about, the things that we were doing, but weren't really shouting about loudly enough, that were really kind of the things that kind of resonate with the consumers now. Some of these things are kind of around about sustainability, and some of these things we were just doing anyway because we're growing tomatoes on an island, and so we've always had to be very, very mindful in terms of how we grow. So one of those things is most of our irrigation we use rainwater. So we utilise the roofs of the glass houses to catch the rainwater, and we store that rainwater in reservoirs, and then we use that to irrigate the crops. And so we do that, and it saves millions and millions of litres of water every year. And we were just doing that, but we weren't shouting about that or saying anything about it. And so it really just made us really focus on all those things that we were doing, doing well, and then sort of brought them to the surface. And I think we're still learning things now, but yeah, it was good. But it's also about messaging and how you message things and how you talk about the brand. I think we'd always just talked about the Isle of Wight tomatoes and they're great, but how do you channel that in a different way that actually a new consumer that's never heard of you before kind of understands kind of what your brand is and what your brand represents.
Yeah, and sustainability is just rightfully so big. I remember years ago at Green and Blacks, we were doing focus groups for sort of a couple of different projects, and we always knew that fair trade was high on the list of importances for the brand, etc. But what we saw was just how important. And even though Green and Blacks was kind of known as, well, we thought it was known as the first fair trade product pretty much in the UK, but I think as much as we did talk about it, there was an opportunity we could have spoken about it a lot more, because you look at Tony's Chocolate Only that have come along, and they're not really doing anything vastly different to what other brands have done before, but they really just built it, weaved it into the brand in an incredible way, and you just saw that the power that's had in the last couple of years with their launch in the UK. There is that opportunity for a lot of brands to maybe hero it more, talk about it more, because the appetite's there from consumers.
Definitely. I think you're right there. It's that appetite from consumers. And I think, potentially social media and, different formats have helped change that. I think people are a lot more aware. People are a lot more interested. People have got a lot more avenues to go and explore things than maybe you did sort of 10, 15 years ago when, things were still very much in print media. If you wanted to find out about a story. So, people were, I suppose back then were looking more, at flavour. And now it's about looking at flavour and all the other things that layer that up as well. But it's the messaging. And I think, if you're a brand now and you're out there talking about yourself, you need to be projecting like everything that you do. Yeah, because I think that's what people are interested in. People are content hungry as well now.
I'd definitely give your Instagram channel a big shout out, because it's amazing. Just flicking through gorgeous pictures of tomatoes, tasty food. Like, it is a great channel. Not every brand has a product that can do that. You very much can just let your product do a lot of the heavy lifting.
100%. We're very fortunate that the tomato is really the hero, I think, in a lot of it, and and we get a lot of content because of that. People are really keen to take photographs of what they've done and share it. And
we'll finish with some of the questions that we usually like to wrap up with asking our guests, and the first one is sort of one of the newer ones. I'm not sure how often we've asked this before, but be interesting to know, are there any other brands that inspire you, whether it's in food or outside of food? Are there any other brands that you look at and you kind of think, you take learnings from, or you're just inspired by?
It's a really good question. I think if you look at kind of brands, I think they're doing good things now in terms of, CSR and sustainability. There are some brands out there, I think, that do things really well. I think Bella Zoo's a good brand in terms of what they're doing, especially kind of the whole B Corp thing and kind of the community they've created through that. You mentioned like Tony's Chocolate Only, I think have done a great job of like bringing that kind of messaging to the kind of the forefront, haven't they? And getting people to think differently. In kind of tomatoes and produce, there aren't too many brands. You've got there's really, really big brands like Pink Lady apples and stuff like that. But they're really big. There's not too many sort of smaller sort of challenger brands.
We were talking about this the other day in fresh vegetables, particularly. and fruit. There aren't many, but the two that we call it is the Alfred Bartlett potatoes you see occasionally. It's a very commoditized market, obviously, potatoes. And then there was like the Driscoll raspberries and berries generally, but there are very few. So it's quite a difficult thing to become a recognised brand in a commoditized market, which comes down to how well you've done to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think you can do like that, like Pierre Kaufmann's doing, like Kaufmann's in terms of potatoes and chips and stuff like that. Which I think
we tried those as soon as they came out.
Yes, nice and cheap, weren't they?
Yeah. But I think any brand at the moment is about kind of what they do, isn't it? It's about one, it's got to be it's about the product. Yeah, the product's got to be great and it's got to inspire. But ultimately, what is the brand also doing? What makes up the brand other than just the product? It's the people, it's kind of the story, it's kind of sustainability and how they interact with the environment and community and things like that. I think now a brand needs to be a much more rounded kind of package.
Yeah.
I think it was, because you talk about sustainability, but sustainability also comes back to a business, doesn't it? How do you make a business sustainable? Yeah. And you've got to make it sustainable for the future. Yeah. And I think that's key.
Yeah. A lot of these are sort of now they're mandatory almost. The consumer expects a company to have all these things as part of their list of things that they're doing. Whereas previously, it might have just been about the taste or something, but you've got to be far more holistic in what your view.
But also in terms of people that work within the business as well. You've got to inspire people that work within the business. And it's not sometimes just about the product; it's about everything else, isn't it? And people want to feel that they're part of something now, and they're making a difference. And I think that's how you get the best people.
Yeah, and we better
for
the same.
You, better for the planet. Yeah, 100%. Have you had a piece of advice in your career that you always remember, like best piece of advice? Or
doesn't have to be from us. It could be from anyone.
I think kind of stay true to your strategy. Stay true to kind of where you want to get to. Don't sort of deviate too much from what you think other people are doing. Just focus on kind of what you're doing. And
it's hard to do, to ignore the noise sometimes. Yeah, especially sometimes longer term strategy. You got to stick with it. And not get kind of don't wobble just because there's a hiccup or a certain challenge.
And I think we've all been guilty of that, and you can sort of go off on a tangent in a different direction. But I think just stay true to kind of what it is you set out in the first place to do, and where you want to take it and where you want to get to.
Great. Do you have a desert island dish?
Desert island dish.
Your last meal on Earth. What would you choose?
Would it have tomatoes?
I should probably say it should have something to tomato, shouldn't I? But that's a bit too cliche. But I don't know. I kind of like the basics still, like some of the things that are done really, really, really well. So like maybe like a really good steak.
Often chefs say that. Is that because and I know you don't chef anymore, but that's what you were doing. Is that they might be cooking all these different things and they're very accomplished, but at the end of the day, just want something that's just really simple and tasty.
Exactly. Well, no. I mean,
you had the same probably when you were a chef.
But that would be up there with mine. Just a really good sort of dry aged, sort of well aged steak, sort of 40, 45, 50 days plus if you can. But I would have it with homemade chips,
of course,
and roasted tomatoes and some roasted mushrooms with some garlic and herb butter or something.
Yeah.
But again, I would go roasted tomatoes.
That's what my daughter's birthday next week. She's requested steak, homemade chips.
But I think it's a simplicity of ingredient. If you start with a really, really good ingredient, then you're gonna have you're gonna have a really good experience. I think that's key.
As long as you don't overcook it. Steak
very true. Yeah,
true. And do you have a favourite restaurant?
Pretty lots of favourites. I think one that really sticks in my mind was kind of last time I was in Australia. It was a restaurant called Key, down in Sydney Harbour. A guy called Peter Gilmore. That was.
Is that spelled Quay rather than Key?
Yeah, it's in Key, down at Circular Quay in Sydney Harbour. A chef called Peter Gilmore. That was pretty special.
Nice.
And what sort of food is at Key? Is it their sort of take on here when people say to me, what does so-and-so restaurant does? And often it's like, well, it's modern European, but it's a sort of, which is sort of, often using different techniques from different European countries, but using British ingredients. But is there a sort of an equivalent in Australia?
I suppose it's been pretty modern Australian, but with using very different techniques
and different ingredients. I remember when MasterChef Australia came out, and it was a few years ago, but even by then, I'd given up watching TV shows because I just can't. After when I was chefing, just however many days in the kitchen, the last thing I wanted to do was watch cooking programs. And so there's very few that would get my attention. But the MasterChef Australia one did, because it's a different world of ingredients in terms of what's influenced from Southeast Asia. And
that's why
just
it's
really interesting, like things we don't really get here and work with in terms of different sort of seafoods and flavours.
That's why it stuck in my mind. And it was actually MasterChef Australia was the inspiration to go there in the first place. I'd seen it on MasterChef Australia, and then when I was in Australia, I was like, yeah, we're going to go there.
Okay. And do you have anything else going on in your world, whether it's you personally or Isle of Wight Tomatoes? What's coming up? What should people look out for?
I think Isle of Wight Tomatoes, it's always going to be about innovation, and it's just going to be always about trying to find that more sort of tasty, interesting tomato type varieties. Me personally, at the moment, it's all about children. We have 2 very small children, so they take up a lot of my time outside of work at the moment.
Familiar with that, aren't we, Mike?
Yeah, mine a bit older, but still, it carries on.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Paul.
Thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure hearing
Paul.
more about the journey, etc. Yeah, definitely. Shout out to the Instagram channel, and
just the website. Buy some of those tomatoes because 100%. They are absolutely
amazing.
Even now, they've still got a few. You've still got a few
left. Probably for about a week or so, and then look out for next spring.
Well, you better get baking a few loaves of sourdough so we can do a worthy trade before the end of the season.
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Consider it done.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. And for more information, please visit tastehead.com. We hope you join us for our next episode.